It is our third video about types of psychologists. But before running through what is new, we have to summarize what we said before. We have started our chapter by addressing two questions. The first one is, do we have one type of psychology, or we have many types of psychology, and by definition many types of psychologists? And the second question was, why are we interested in discovering the different type of psychologists? Regarding the first questions, of course, we have many types of psychologists, and mainly we will address two types. Number one, pure or basic psychologist, and the number two, applied psychologist. And under each one, we have many subtypes. Regarding the second question, why are we interested in discovering the different type of psychologists? The answer is because discovering the different type of psychologists will enable us to answer the question of what do psychologists do? What about the first type of psychology? And the first type of psychologist, pure or basic psychology or pure or basic psychologist? We already defined the pure or basic psychology as the discipline that tries to discover the basic laws and the principles of psychological and the mental phenomena. What about the second type of psychology? Applied psychology or applied psychologist, if we are talking about the professional in this field. Because we have a paid occupation, especially one that involves prolonged training and formal qualifications, so psychology is a profession as well as a science. And in that way, we can define the applied psychologist or applied psychology if we are talking about the discipline, not the professional. Applied psychology tries to put basic principles and psychological phenomena that discovered by the basic psychologist into practice. Put into practice means they try to apply the knowledge discovered by the basic psychologist. And as we said before, applying these principles will enable psychologists to help humans in one way or another. So we have industrial psychology, we have organizational psychology, we have clinical psychology, we have educational psychology. We have different type of psychologists and different type of psychology in which we try to apply the basic science in order to help humans in one way or another. But although we are interested in discovering the different type of psychology, and you are interested in understanding the differences between pure or basic psychology in one hand and applied psychologist on the other hand, although that actually no clear-cut distinction between them, because many psychologists may combine between the two kinds of interests and the two kinds of activities in what they do. Many psychologists teach in colleges and universities and there, and through their research, they may add much to our knowledge of human behavior and human nature. And in addition to that, many of them apply psychology in different settings, such as clinics, schools, military organization, factories, and so on. And you have to remember that after explaining the difference between pure psychology and applied psychology, basic psychology and applied psychology, already we start to cover some about subtypes of pure or basic psychologists. And we cover some knowledge about 6 subtypes of basic psychologists, including number 1, experimental psychologist, number 2, physiological psychologist, number 3, a psychologist who is interested in animal psychology, number 4, developmental psychologist, number 5, social psychologist, and the last one was psychologist who is interested in abnormal psychology. What about today? Our journey today is to the applied psychology. What about the subtypes of applied psychology and by definition, subtypes of applied psychologist? We will study 7 subtypes of applied psychologists. They are sports psychologist, industrial and organizational psychologist, military psychologist, educational psychologist, clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist, and psychoanalyst. And in this video, we will check the meaning of the first 4 subtypes. I mean, sports psychologist, industrial psychologist, military psychologist, and educational psychologist. Now, let us start with the sports psychologist. Sports psychology is a hybrid field in which scientific theories about human perception, memory, and motivation are applied in physiological context, including biomechanics and kinesiology. And as with other psychological fields of study, extensive education and training is required, usually including a doctoral degree and several years of postgraduate training. Now, what about the definition of a sports psychologist? We can introduce 2 definitions. Number 1, it says a sports psychologist is a licensed mental health professional who helps athletes improve their performance and focus. And the second definition says the sports psychologist works with sport players to help them identify, number 1, identify their challenges, number 2, work through difficult times or hard times, and number 3, set goals. This is the 2 definitions we introduced about sports psychologists. Now, what about the second type, subtype? Industrial organizational psychology refers to the applied organizational psychology used to study, analyze, and understand human behavior in the workplace, mainly how business works and how employees function. In other words, we can say that industrial psychology refers to the applied organizational psychology used to study, analyze, and understand the human behavior in the workplace, mainly how business works and how employees function. And industrial psychology also uses a range of scientific methods, including quantitative and qualitative data. And most often, it's applied when the company is going through a transition phase. Uh, and we have aims of industrial psychology. A common focus of industrial psychology is leadership, and we have three main strands of leadership. Number one, leadership focused approach based on a belief that effective leaders have certain qualities others lack. Follower focused approach based on belief. Leaders need to know how to motivate and enthuse employees. And contingency focused approach based on a belief, a belief that effective leaders are more able to assess a situation and adapt their behavior accordingly. Now, we can introduce the following definition to industrial organizational psychology. The field of industrial organizational psychology applies the psychologist's scientific knowledge of human behavior in order to help determine which organizational and leadership techniques are most effective for a particular place of business. So, industrial psychologists works with individual employees or managers. And so, for example, the psychologist may help managers to discover the best methods to teach employees new processes. And as we said a few seconds ago, we have three types of leadership. Number one, leader focused. In this type of way of interaction between leaders and the employees, it depends mainly how it is approach, including a belief that effective leaders have some qualities others lack, they don't have. While the second type, follower focused. In this trend, the leaders should have the ability to motivate and enthuse employees to work very good. And the third one, in which the focus is on the situation and the effective leaders who are more able to assess the situation, and depending on that, they adapt their behaviors. We can the tasks of the industrial psychologist as follows. They may help to find the best ways for employees to work as a group. They have to find the best way to improve the company, the company's performance and production. And also, they may help in discovering the best one for a job and the best job for one. And also, the industrial psychologists have to help the managers to achieve the company's goals. That's all about industrial organizational psychology. Now we are going to define the military psychologist. Psychology may be viewed as the conduct of research of or practice of psychological principles within a military environment. In the World War II, more than 2,000 psychologists, both in and out uniform, worked for the military. Clinical psychologists studied a combat, stress, and the problems associated with vocational guidance and rehabilitation. So, military psychology is the research, design, and application of psychological theories and the experimentation data towards understanding, predicting, and countering behaviors, either in friendly or enemy forces or civilian population that may be undesirable, threatening, and potentially dangerous to the conduct of military operations. So the first point we have to cover about military psychology is the definition of military psychology, which is the research, design, and application of psychological theories and experimentation data towards understanding, predicting, and countering behaviors, either in friendly or enemy forces or civilian populations that may be undesirable, threatening, or potentially dangerous to the conduct of military operations. But military psychology utilizes multiple psychology to encourage resiliency among military troops and counteract enemy forces for military victims. The stressors and mental illnesses studied under military psychology are not specific to the military. However, soldiers often face unique combination of stresses with combat and war settings and may go on to experience stress-related psychiatric disorders. Some examples of these psychiatric or stress-related psychiatric disorders is post-traumatic disorder, which is abbreviated as PTSD. So military psychology is applied towards counseling and the treatment of stress, fatigue, and psychological traumas suffered as a result of military operation. Military psychology related to different tasks. It is referred to as interrogation. Interrogation of prisoners who may provide information that would enhance outcomes of friendly military operations and reduce friendly casualties. That's all about military psychology. So we covered the definition of military psychology, its role in counseling and treating psychological traumas, and its role in interrogation. Now, what about the educational psychologist? Educational psychologist. Educational psychology is the study of how humans learn in educational settings, the effectiveness of educational intervention. If I'm going to do some educational intervention, such as changing my style of teaching, this is referred to as educational intervention. And I am going to assess its effectiveness on the student. Now it is psychology studies the effectiveness of these educational interventions and the psychology of teaching and the the social psychology of schools as organization. Educational psychology also deals with gifted children and the children with different disabilities such as intellectual disability, autism, cerebral palsy, Asperger syndrome, ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and so on. What is the difference between educational psychology and the school psychology? In Egypt and maybe in United Kingdom, no difference between educational psychologists and the school psychologists. So you can use them interchangeably. They are the same. But in United States and Canada, there is a very big difference between school psychologists and educational psychologists. If you are doing research, you will be classified in the educational settings. If you are doing research in the educational settings, you will be classified as an educational psychologist. And in that case, according to them, educational psychologist is not an applied science. It's not an applied psychology. It is a basic psychology. But if you are trying to apply the results of this research in order to improve the performance of the students, in order to help them in these educational settings, in that case, you will be referred as school psychologists. And we have big names, big figures in this area, such as Stanley Hall and Edward Lee Thorndike. Now we have to move to the last three types of applied psychologist, clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist, and psychoanalyst. And this is the main issue we will discuss in the next video. Thank you.